The grand double doors swung open with a sudden, resonating force, silencing the room like a thunderclap. Heads turned in unison, conversations breaking off mid-sentence as an unexpected figure stepped into the gilded wedding hall. Sophia. She stood there in the entryway, her swollen belly strained against the soft fabric of her maternity gown, and her hair, undone by the wind, framed a face streaked with tears, but set with unyielding determination. In her trembling hands, a stack of papers clutched tightly, their edges crumpled from her grip. Every step she took echoed off the polished marble floor as she advanced down the aisle, her eyes scanning the sea of stunned faces until they landed on him, Ryan, the man at the altar, her husband, the father of her unborn child. The confident smile on Ryan's face evaporated in an instant. His new bride-to-be, Olivia, turned toward him in confusion, her veil trembling in her grasp. Ryan? Her eyes searched his, the tremor in her voice unmistakable. Who is she? Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe in standing up for yourself and fighting for what's right, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sophia's life was built on hard work and determination. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, made herself a strong cup of coffee, and headed to the boutique hotel she managed in downtown Seattle. It wasn't a glamorous job, not the kind of work that people dreamed of doing, but it was her pride. The hotel was small, just 3 stories, with cozy rooms and a staff of less than 20. But to Sophia, it was more than a job. It was something she had poured her heart into for years. She greeted every guest with a warm smile, always remembering their names and little details about their stays. "Good morning, Mr. Clark," she'd say, handing over a fresh set of towels. "I hope your meeting goes well today." Her staff respected her because she worked alongside them, not above them. If the front desk was swamped, she'd jump in to help answer phones. If the cleaning crew was short-handed, she'd grab gloves and scrub bathrooms without complaint. She believed no task was too small if it made someone's day better. But even on her busiest days, she'd take a moment to pause in the lobby, looking out at the rainy streets of Seattle. It gave her a strange kind of peace, watching people rush by, clutching umbrellas against the drizzle. This city, she'd tell herself quietly, might be gray most of the time, but it's full of life. She loved it here. The chaos, the charm, even the endless rain. It was home. At the end of each shift, when the front doors finally locked and the staff headed home, Sophia stayed back a little longer, going through the accounts and making sure everything was just right. Her co-workers teased her about it sometimes. "Sophia, you've got to learn to switch off," her assistant manager Ellen would say with a playful nudge. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave." Sophia would laugh it off, waving her hand dismissively. "Can't help it," she'd reply. "If it's not perfect, it'll keep me up all night." That's the kind of person she was, the kind who put everyone else first, the kind who didn't mind sacrificing her evenings or weekends because she knew it meant the hotel and the people working there would thrive. But her life wasn't just about work. There was Ryan after all. She still remembered the night she met him. It was at a small bar downtown. She'd gone out with Ellen for a drink after a particularly long day, and there he was, Ryan. The kind of man who commanded attention the second he walked into a room. He had this easy, confident charm, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. He caught her looking, and before she could turn away, he walked over, his smile bright enough to outshine the dim bar lights. "Is this seat taken?" he had asked, pointing to the bar stool next to her. She'd blushed a little but shook her head. "Go ahead," she said. And from there, it was like they'd known each other forever. He talked about his big dreams, how he wanted to build an empire, something people would remember him for. He told her about his love for architecture, about how one day he'd design skyscrapers that touched the clouds, and she, of course, was hooked. "You're amazing," he told her that night, after they'd laughed and talked for hours. "You're different, Sophia. You're not like anyone I've ever met." And she believed him. Why wouldn't she? He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The weeks after that were like a whirlwind. Ryan would pick her up from work with flowers, take her to little rooftop spots where they'd drink wine and talk about the future. One day, he'd say, holding her hand under the city lights, "We're going to have it all, you and me." She could still hear his voice, so warm and full of conviction. Sophia's friends and family liked him, mostly, but there were whispers. "He's charming, sure," her mom had said once, tilting her head thoughtfully. "But be careful, sweetheart. Charm doesn't always mean honesty." Her best friend Kara was more blunt. "I don't know, Soph. He talks a big game, but where's the proof? All these big projects. Has he actually followed through on any of them?" Sophia brushed it off, though. "He just needs a chance," she'd said, defending him every time. "It's not easy to make it big in this world. He's trying. Isn't that what matters?" And deep down, she believed it. Ryan wasn't perfect, but who was? They got married within a year, a small ceremony at a lakeside cabin. Nothing fancy, but it was beautiful. She'd saved up for most of it herself, but she didn't mind. Ryan promised her this was just the beginning, that their big dreams would come to life soon enough. She believed him. Sophia poured herself into their life together, doing everything she could to make it work. She threw herself into her work at the hotel, determined to save as much as she could. Nights off became rare. Weekends were spent catching up on paperwork or ironing out staffing schedules. And when her friends invited her out to dinners or movie nights, she'd often decline, saying, "I'm trying to save. Next time, for sure." She would sit at the dining table late at night, the soft glow of her laptop lighting up her face as she meticulously tracked her expenses. Every dollar mattered. If she skipped a fancy coffee here or a new dress there, it would add up. She had a vision of their future, a cozy home, a family, a life without constant financial worry, and it kept her going. Ryan, on the other hand, lived in the moment. "I need this to seal the deal," he'd say, holding up a sleek new suit he'd bought on a whim. Sophia would glance at the price tag, her stomach sinking slightly, but she forced herself to smile. "You're sure this will help?" she'd ask quietly. "Absolutely," he'd reply confidently, flashing her that same grin that had won her over in the first place. "You've got to look the part to play the part, babe." And just like that, she'd let it go. Because Ryan was working hard too, wasn't he? He was always talking about meetings and deals, always on his phone or typing away on his laptop. "It's all for us," he'd remind her. "You're the reason I'm doing this, Soph." She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. After all, she wasn't just saving for herself anymore. She was saving for them, for their future. And love, she told herself, meant trusting someone even when things weren't perfect. Sophia hadn't felt that kind of joy in a long time. It had been an ordinary morning, a cloudy Seattle day. She'd woken up feeling off, a strange mix of exhaustion and nausea that didn't go away even after her usual cup of coffee. At first, she brushed it off as overwork. Too many late nights, she muttered to herself, staring at the untouched toast on her plate. But then, a thought crept into her mind. Tentative, but hopeful. Later that day, she picked up a pregnancy test from the pharmacy, her heart thudding the whole way home. She didn't tell Ryan. She wasn't even sure why. Maybe it was because a part of her was scared it wouldn't be true, or scared of how much she wanted it to be. But when the 2 lines appeared, her breath caught, and her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the result, a mix of disbelief and wonder washing over her. That evening, when Ryan walked through the door, Sophia could barely contain herself. She waited until after dinner, until they were both sitting on the couch, and then she pulled out the little gift bag she'd put together. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he took it from her. "Just open it," she said, biting her lip to keep from grinning too hard. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes and a handwritten note that simply read, "You're going to be a dad." Ryan stared at the note for a moment, the room suddenly feeling still. Then he looked up at her, his face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. "Soph," he whispered, setting the bag down and pulling her into his arms. "We're going to be amazing parents. I promise you that." Ryan was so excited, already making plans. "We'll get a bigger place," he said, his voice filled with that same confidence that had drawn her to him in the first place. "I'll make sure our kid has everything they need. Private school, college fund, the works." Sophia felt herself getting swept up in his vision. She started imagining the nursery, soft pastel colors, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, little stuffed animals waiting on a shelf. She thought about their baby's first steps, first words, first everything. For the first time in a long while, she felt like their future was solid, like the cracks in their life together were finally starting to seal. But the thing about cracks is that they're still there, even if you don't look at them too closely. It was about a month later when Ryan brought up the idea. They were sitting at the dining table after dinner, the dishes still scattered between them. Sophia was rubbing her belly absent-mindedly, already showing just a little. Ryan cleared his throat, shifting in his chair, and she looked up, sensing he had something on his mind. "I've been thinking," he started, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, "about the baby, about us." Sophia tilted her head, curious. "Okay, what about us?" Ryan took a deep breath, like he was about to lay out something big. "I've got an opportunity," he said. "A business deal. It's huge, Soph. If it works out, we'll be set for life. No more budgeting, no more worrying about money. We'll have everything we've ever talked about. A big house, a college fund, all of it." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. "What kind of deal?" she asked, frowning slightly. "It's a real estate investment," Ryan said quickly, his words tumbling out as though he'd rehearsed them. "There's this development project downtown. I've got an in, but I need capital. It's $60,000, but that's the buy-in for something life-changing." Sophia's stomach dropped. $60,000. That was their entire savings. She folded her hands on the table, her voice quiet. That's everything we've got, Ryan. I know, he said, reaching out to take her hand. But think about it. This isn't just for me. It's for us, for the baby. Don't you want the best for them? Don't you want to give them a life where they don't have to struggle? Sophia stared at him, her thoughts racing. She wanted those things, of course she did. But giving up their savings? That was everything she'd worked so hard for. I don't know, she said hesitantly. It's a lot of money, Ryan. And what if it doesn't work out? It will work out, he said firmly, squeezing her hand. You trust me, don't you? I've never been more sure about anything in my life, Soph. I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't believe in this. The way he looked at her then, it was like he'd stripped away every doubt she had. His eyes were full of conviction, his voice steady and reassuring, and for a moment, she felt selfish for hesitating. This was their family, their future. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was their chance to finally have the life they'd always talked about. Sophia touched her belly, her fingers brushing over the slight curve. She began, trailing off before finally meeting his eyes. Okay, I'll do it. But Ryan, this has to work. It will, he said with a smile, pulling her into a hug. You won't regret this, I promise. That night, Sophia logged into her bank account and transferred the $60,000 to Ryan. As she hit send, her hands trembled slightly, but she told herself it was just nerves. Everything was going to be fine. Ryan wouldn't let her down, would he? It had been a week since she transferred the money, and while she told herself over and over that she trusted Ryan, a strange uneasiness lingered. It crept in during quiet moments, like when she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her half-eaten breakfast, or when she folded the soft, tiny baby clothes on the couch. She tried to push it aside. You're overthinking, she'd mutter under her breath. But Ryan's behavior had changed, and that was hard to ignore. He had always been talkative, always quick to share his plans with her, but now he seemed distant, distracted. When she asked how the deal was going, he'd wave her off with a quick, "It's all fine, babe. Just a lot of moving parts right now." His tone was casual, but he wouldn't meet her eyes when he said it, and that gnawed at her. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, she heard the front door creak open. Ryan walked in, his hair slightly disheveled, his shirt untucked. He smiled at her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, kissing her cheek quickly, before heading straight for the bedroom. "Long day?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel and following him. "Yeah," he called over his shoulder. "Meetings back to back. I'm beat." As she entered the room, she caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. It wasn't his usual cologne. This was floral, almost sweet. Sophia paused in the doorway, her stomach twisting slightly. "Is that new cologne?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. Ryan froze for a split second, barely noticeable, before pulling off his tie and tossing it onto the bed. No, must be someone in the office," he said quickly. "You know how people like to douse themselves in perfume these days." He chuckled, but it felt forced. Sophia nodded, though her unease deepened. "Yeah, I guess so," she murmured, turning back to the kitchen. That night, as they ate dinner, Ryan's phone buzzed repeatedly on the table. Each time he glanced at it and then flipped it face down. Sophia watched him carefully, her fork hovering over her plate. "Aren't you going to check that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Nah," he said quickly. "It's just work stuff." "Work stuff at 8 o'clock at night?" He shot her a sharp look, and for a moment, she regretted saying anything. "Yeah, work stuff doesn't follow a 9 to 5 schedule, Soph," he said, his tone clipped. "You'd know that if you worked in my world." The comment stung, and Sophia lowered her gaze to her plate. "Right," she muttered. "Sorry I asked." The days that followed only added to her growing suspicion. Ryan was coming home later and later, always with some vague excuse about meetings or last-minute calls. His tone grew more impatient whenever she asked questions, and she found herself treading carefully, not wanting to spark another argument. But the small inconsistencies began to pile up, and Sophia couldn't ignore them. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the living room, she noticed a crumpled receipt in the pocket of Ryan's jacket. Curious, she smoothed it out, her brow furrowing as she read it. It was for a dinner at an expensive restaurant downtown, one she'd never been to, with a timestamp from 2 nights ago. That was the night he'd told her he was working late. Sophia's heart sank as she stared at the receipt. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. She tried to convince herself there was an explanation. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, she knew better. That evening, she couldn't bring herself to bring it up. Instead, she watched Ryan carefully as they sat on the couch, his attention fixed on his phone. He was scrolling through messages, his expression unreadable. Then, his phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a notification from an unknown number. Sophia leaned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but Ryan quickly tilted the phone away and silenced it. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice soft but tense. "No one important," he said without looking up. She bit her lip, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "Ryan, is there something you're not telling me?" He finally looked at her, his expression hardening. What's that supposed to mean? Sophia hesitated, feeling the weight of her words before she spoke. It's just, you've been so distant lately, and the late nights, the messages, it doesn't feel like work. Ryan's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe this, he muttered, pacing the room. I'm out there busting my ass for us, and you're sitting here doubting me? That's not what I— Save it, Sophia, he snapped, cutting her off. I don't need this right now. I've got enough on my plate. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door without another word, leaving Sophia sitting there, her heart pounding and tears welling in her eyes. As the days passed, the tension between them grew thicker, and Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. Late one night, as she lay awake in bed, she couldn't ignore it any longer. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, tapping softly against the windows of the house. The house felt eerily quiet, except for the rhythmic patter outside. Sophia sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring blankly at the unopened book in her lap. She couldn't focus. Her thoughts kept circling back to Ryan, his odd behavior, the hurried phone calls, the excuses that didn't quite add up. She had told herself over and over again that she was just imagining things, that pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. But no matter how much she tried to reason with herself, something didn't feel right. The baby kicked gently, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts for a moment. She placed a hand on her belly and took a deep breath. It's okay, she whispered softly. Everything's fine. But even as she said the words, they felt hollow. Her eyes drifted to Ryan's desk in the corner of the room. The surface was cluttered with papers and folders, a mess he hadn't bothered to organize in weeks. She hesitated, biting her lip. He'd always been private about his work, brushing her off whenever she asked too many questions. But tonight, the weight of her suspicions felt unbearable. Sophia stood slowly, her bare feet making soft sounds on the hardwood floor as she crossed the room. Just bills, she told herself as she reached the desk. I'm just organizing the bills. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first drawer, sifting through a jumble of receipts and sticky notes. Nothing unusual. She moved to the next drawer, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. At first, it was just little things. An invoice for a high-end floral arrangement, her husband's name scrawled in elegant script at the top, Ryan Marshall and Olivia Carter. She froze, the paper crinkling slightly under her fingers. Olivia? Who was Olivia? She shook her head, trying to push down the rising panic. Maybe it was work-related, a corporate event maybe. But then her eyes caught another document, a catering contract for an upcoming event. The same names appeared again, printed in bold at the top, Ryan Marshall and Olivia Carter. Her breath hitched. She rifled through the drawer more urgently now, papers scattering onto the desk. In the very back, tucked beneath a stack of unrelated forms, she found it, a gilded wedding invitation. Sophia stared at the card in her hands, the ornate design shimmering faintly under the soft glow of the desk lamp. The edges of the paper were delicate, the gold lettering elegant and sharp. Her eyes scanned the words, each one sinking like a stone in her chest. Join us to celebrate the union of Ryan Marshall and Olivia Carter. Her knees buckled slightly, and she sank into the chair beside the desk. 2 weeks. The wedding was in 2 weeks. The date stared back at her, mocking her, as if the universe had planned it just to twist the knife deeper. The rain outside grew louder, mirroring the tears that streamed down her face. She clutched the invitation tightly, her fingers trembling. Her mind raced, fragments of the past weeks flashing in her head. Ryan's late nights, the unfamiliar perfume, the curt responses. She had been so blind, so willing to believe in him despite every sign telling her not to. How could you do this? She whispered into the empty room, her voice breaking. How could you lie to me? To us? She thought about the money, the $60,000 she had poured into his so-called business deal. She thought about the baby, the tiny life growing inside her, and the future she had been so sure they were building together. Sophia wiped her face with the back of her hand, the invitation still clutched tightly in the other. The betrayal felt crushing, like a weight pressing down on her chest, threatening to break her entirely. She stared at her phone, lying face up on the nightstand, the light from the screen casting a faint glow. The name of the wedding venue, printed in perfect gold script on the invitation, felt like it was taunting her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. She didn't want to do this, didn't want to hear what she already feared was the truth. But she couldn't let it go, not now. Taking a deep breath, she began dialing the number, her thumb hovering over the green call button for a moment too long. Please let this be a mistake, she whispered to herself. Please. Her thumb pressed the button, and the phone rang. Each tone felt like it was pulling her closer to something she couldn't take back. Finally, a voice answered, cheerful and professional. Good evening. Thank you for calling Evergreen Estate. How can I help you today? Sophia froze for a moment, her mind racing. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. Hi, my name's, Julia. I'm calling on behalf of Olivia Carter. I'm her assistant, and I just needed to confirm some details about her upcoming wedding. There was a slight pause on the other end, the receptionist sounding a little unsure. Oh, sure. Could you please verify your role again? We've been dealing with Mr. Marshall directly for most of the planning. Sophia felt her chest tighten. Yes, of course, she said quickly, trying to keep her tone steady. I'm just helping Olivia with a few last-minute things. She asked me to double-check the details because she's been so busy lately. She glanced at the invitation, rattling off the date and the venue address printed on the card. It's on the 15th, right? At Evergreen Estate? The receptionist seemed to relax, the slight edge in her voice disappearing. Yes, that's correct. Everything is all set for the 15th. It's going to be a beautiful day. We've got all the arrangements confirmed. Sophia's fingers tightened around the phone, her knuckles white. She could barely breathe, but she forced herself to keep going. Great, could you remind me what's been confirmed, just so I can make sure Olivia has everything she needs? The receptionist chuckled softly. Oh, don't worry. Mr. Marshall has been very thorough. He's made sure everything is perfect for Olivia. The flowers, the catering, the music, it's all been taken care of. He's really been such a gentleman. Sophia's stomach churned at the words, bile rising in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to hang up, to stop torturing herself, but she couldn't. And, the payment? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's all sorted too? Yes, everything's fully paid, the receptionist replied casually. I believe Mr. Marshall used his business account for the initial deposit. It was very generous. He made sure there wouldn't be any issues. Sophia's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She gripped the edge of the nightstand to steady herself, the phone pressing hard against her ear. She felt like the room was spinning, the receptionist's words circling in her head. Right, she said weakly, her voice cracking. Of course. Thank you so much for your help. Oh, no problem. And please let Olivia know we're looking forward to hosting her big day. Sophia ended the call without another word, the phone slipping from her hand and landing on the bed with a soft thud. Her breathing was shallow, her chest heaving as the weight of what she'd just heard settled in. Ryan had used her money, their money. He'd lied to her, taken everything she'd worked for, and spent it on a wedding for Olivia. Sophia sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The phone lay discarded next to her, its screen dark, but the receptionist's words echoed in her head like a taunting whisper she couldn't escape. Mr. Marshall made sure everything was perfect for Olivia. He's been such a gentleman. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, but the world spun, and before she knew it, she sank to the floor, clutching her stomach instinctively. It wasn't even a conscious action. It was something primal, as if by holding her baby, she could somehow protect them from the ugly truth crashing down around her. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, dripping onto the soft fabric of her maternity dress. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, rocking slightly as the memories of Ryan's promises flooded her mind. You're my world, Soph. I'm doing all of this for us. We're going to be amazing parents. Just you wait. Trust me, this is for our future, for the baby. Every word he'd ever said felt like a dagger twisting deeper into her chest. How could he? How could someone lie so convincingly, look her in the eye every day, and still go behind her back like this? She thought about all the times she had doubted him, the little moments when something felt off. She had brushed it all aside, convincing herself that she was overthinking, that Ryan deserved her faith. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress, the movement sending a faint ache through her arms. She tilted her head back, letting out a shaky breath that turned into a soft, broken sob. The baby shifted slightly inside her, grounding her in the smallest way. It wasn't just her anymore. She wasn't just grieving for herself, but for the family she thought they were building together. Minutes passed, maybe longer. She couldn't tell. But eventually the tears slowed and her breathing steadied. Wiping her damp cheeks with trembling hands, she sat there on the floor, staring at the mess of papers on the desk, the invitation, the receipts, the proof of everything Ryan had hidden from her. It all sat there like evidence in a courtroom, demanding a verdict. What now? The question loomed heavy in her mind, its weight pressing harder than her grief. She thought about confronting Ryan, about holding up the evidence in front of him and demanding answers. But then what? What would he do? He'd deny it, twist it around, make her feel like she was the one losing control. Her eyes shifted to the invitation, its gold lettering catching the faint light from the desk lamp. 2 weeks. The wedding was in 2 weeks. If she waited until then, if she showed up uninvited, in front of everyone he was trying to impress, Olivia, their guests, their family, there would be no escaping it. No chance for him to spin lies. Everyone would see the truth for what it was. Sophia's stomach churned at the thought. Was she really the kind of person who could do that? Could she walk into a room full of strangers, expose her husband, and watch everything unravel in front of her? She didn't want to be that person. She wanted to be the woman who quietly held things together, who endured pain for the sake of others. But this This was too much. She pushed herself off the floor, her legs shaky but determined. She needed proof. Everything she could gather, every scrap of evidence that showed the depth of Ryan's betrayal. If she was going to do this, she had to be prepared. She started with her marriage certificate, pulling it carefully from the filing cabinet in the corner of the room. The paper felt heavy in her hands, a painful reminder of the promises Ryan had made and broken. She laid it on the desk next to the invitation. Next, she logged into her bank account, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through the transaction history. There it was, the $60,000 transfer, staring back at her like a scar she couldn't hide. She printed the statement, placing it beside the marriage certificate. Sophia hesitated, her hand hovering over the drawer where she kept personal keepsakes. Slowly, she pulled it open, her fingers brushing against the items inside. A small stack of ultrasound photos sat neatly on top, each one a blurry snapshot of the baby growing inside her. She picked them up carefully, her throat tightening as she stared at the little life they represented. Her eyes fell on something else, a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the photos. She pulled it out, her breath catching as she unfolded it. It was a letter Ryan had written to her years ago, back when they were first dating. Her grip on the paper tightened as fresh tears welled in her eyes. She let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the quiet room. How could someone write those words and then turn around and do this? She placed the letter on the desk with the rest of the evidence, her jaw tightening. By the time she finished, the desk was covered with papers, each one a testament to Ryan's lies. She folded the papers carefully into a folder, her hands steady now, despite the storm raging inside her. Whatever happened next, she would be ready. She owed that much to herself and to the child she was about to bring into the world. The day finally arrived. Sophia gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she drove through the rain-slicked streets. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, barely keeping up with the drizzle. Her heart was racing, pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her stomach churned with a mix of nausea and dread. The folder of evidence sat on the passenger seat, a silent reminder of the confrontation that lay ahead. As she approached the highway, her phone buzzed on the console, the name Ryan lighting up the screen. Her breath hitched. For a moment she thought about letting it go to voicemail, but the ringing felt like a hammer in her chest. She couldn't risk raising suspicion. With trembling fingers, she swiped to answer. "Hey," she said, trying to sound normal, though her voice cracked slightly. "Hey babe," Ryan replied, his tone smooth and casual. "Where are you? You've been out a while." Sophia gritted her teeth, the calmness in his voice igniting a spark of anger deep in her chest. "Just running some errands," she said, forcing herself to stay calm. "Needed a few things for the baby." "Ah, right. You're getting close now, huh?" he said, chuckling lightly. "Not long till we're parents. Can you believe it?" Her grip on the wheel tightened as his words washed over her. The audacity of it, talking about their child as if he wasn't about to marry someone else, as if he hadn't already destroyed everything they'd built together. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yeah," she said softly, her voice barely steady. "Not long now." "Well, I'll see you tonight," he said, his tone upbeat. "I've got some things to take care of, but we'll talk more then." "Sure," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "See you later." "Love you," Ryan added, his words cutting into her like glass. Sophia hesitated, staring at the road ahead. For a split second she thought about saying it back, but her lips refused to form the words. Instead, she hung up without replying, her hands shaking as she dropped the phone back onto the console. The call left her feeling raw, her emotions spiraling as she navigated the rainy streets. Grief clawed at her chest, but it was quickly overtaken by anger. She replayed his words in her mind, how easily he had lied to her, how convincing he was even now. The betrayal burned like fire in her veins, but underneath it all was doubt. Was she really ready to do this? To walk into his perfect day and tear it apart in front of everyone? Her fingers brushed over her belly, as if seeking reassurance. "If I don't do this now, he'll keep getting away with it," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "For my child's sake, I can't let that happen." By the time she reached the venue, the rain had eased to a light drizzle, the gray skies casting a muted glow over the sprawling estate. Sophia parked near the edge of the lot, taking a moment to steady her breathing. She glanced at the folder on the seat next to her, her resolve hardening. "You can do this," she murmured, though her voice wavered. Stepping out of the car, she was immediately struck by the grandeur of the venue. The entrance was lined with towering floral arrangements, their vibrant colors almost too much to look at. She paused, her gaze lingering on the intricate designs, and a bitter thought crossed her mind. She had paid for those flowers. Her chest tightened as she walked toward the main hall. Through the tall windows, she could see the guests mingling inside, their laughter and chatter carrying faintly through the damp air. The scene was warm and inviting, but to Sophia, it felt suffocating. Every smiling face, every cheerful gesture was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Sophia stood just outside the grand doors of the wedding hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The scent of roses and expensive perfume enveloped her, making her stomach churn. The decor was stunning. Opulent chandeliers, rows of perfectly arranged tables, and an elaborate cake standing proudly in the center of the room. The sight of it all was like a slap to the face. She thought about the nights she had skipped dinners out with friends, the times she had chosen second-hand furniture over new, all to save for their future. And this was where it had gone. Inside, the music softened, and she could hear the officiant begin speaking. It was starting. Her pulse quickened as she pressed herself against the wall, peeking through the small crack in the doors. The guests were seated, all smiles and cheer, their eyes fixed on Ryan and Olivia, who stood hand in hand at the altar. Sophia's breath hitched as her gaze landed on Ryan. He looked polished, perfect even, in his crisp suit, his expression calm and confident. He had no idea she was here, just feet away, ready to expose every single one of his lies. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her grip on the folder. "Not yet," she whispered to herself, forcing her feet to stay planted where they were. She had to wait for the right moment. Not too soon, not too late. The officiant's voice rang out, clear and steady. "Do you, Ryan Marshall, take Olivia Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Sophia's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. Her feet moved before she even realized it, propelling her through the doors. She stepped into the hall, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Stop this wedding!" The music screeched to a halt. The guests froze, their heads whipping around in confusion. Gasps rippled through the crowd as everyone turned to look at her. Ryan's smile faltered, his confident expression crumbling as his gaze locked onto Sophia. He stumbled back a step, his hand slipping from Olivia's. "Sophia?" he choked out, his voice barely audible over the murmurs spreading through the room. Olivia stood motionless, her face pale and stricken, her eyes darting between Ryan and the furious woman storming toward the altar. Sophia didn't stop walking until she was standing directly in front of them, her shoulders squared and her jaw set. Her eyes burned as she met Ryan's panicked gaze. "You forgot to invite your wife," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. A collective gasp swept through the room, the whispers growing louder as the weight of her words sank in. Sophia reached into the folder, pulling out the marriage certificate and holding it up for everyone to see. "That's right," she said, her voice rising. "We're still married. So Ryan, care to explain how you're standing here about to marry someone else?" Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched as if to calm her down. "Sophia, let's talk about this." "Talk about what? This wedding you're all celebrating?" she said, her voice breaking but growing stronger with every word. "It was paid for with my life savings. $60,000. That's what I gave him, for our family, for our future, and he spent it on this." She gestured to the room, her hand sweeping over the extravagant decorations, the floral arrangements, the catered food. "Every single thing here was bought with my money. The money I worked for, the money I trusted him with." Ryan's jaw clenched, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "That's not true," he said, his voice desperate now. "She's exaggerating. You're making it sound worse than it is, Sophia. Stop." "Stop?" Sophia's voice cracked, and tears began to spill down her cheeks. But she didn't falter. She reached into the folder again, pulling out the ultrasound photo and holding it up for everyone to see. Her hands shook as she stepped closer to Ryan and Olivia, her gaze fixed on the other woman. "Did he tell you about this?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with pain. "Did he tell you that while he was planning this wedding with you, I was at home carrying his child? Did he tell you about the nights I sat alone, dreaming about the family we were supposed to have? Did he tell you that?" Olivia's eyes widened as she stared at the photo, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. He didn't tell me anything about that." Sophia turned to Ryan again, her voice rising with fury. "You promised me, Ryan. You promised me a future. You promised me a family. And this is what you've been doing? Lying to me? To her? To everyone?" Ryan looked around the room, his calm facade completely shattered. He was sweating now, his eyes darting from Olivia to Sophia to the stunned guests. "I can explain," he stammered, his voice cracking. This isn't what it looks like. She's just trying to ruin everything." "Ruin everything?" Olivia's voice suddenly rang out, sharp and furious. She turned to Ryan, her hands clenched at her sides. "What is she talking about, Ryan? Is it true? Are you married? Does she really have your child?" Ryan stumbled over his words, trying to grasp at straws. "It's complicated," he said weakly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Olivia snapped, her voice cutting through his excuses like a knife. "Before or after we said our vows. God, I believed you. I trusted you." Her voice cracked as tears filled her eyes, her anger mingling with hurt. "You're a liar, a cheat. I can't believe I fell for this." Sophia stood silent for a moment, watching Ryan crumble under the weight of his lies. Her anger was still there, burning bright, but for the first time she felt a sense of relief. The truth was out now, and there was no hiding from it. Ryan looked at Sophia, his face pale and pleading. "Sophia, please, this isn't the place," Ryan said, his voice shaky as he tried to step toward her. "Let's go somewhere private and talk about this. You're blowing everything out of proportion." Sophia didn't move, her jaw clenched and her eyes burning with fury. She didn't need to respond. The evidence on the altar spoke louder than she ever could. Before Ryan could say another word, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hall, cutting through the tension like a blade. The double doors at the back of the room burst open with a loud bang, and 2 uniformed police officers strode in, their presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Gasps erupted from the guests, and heads swiveled to see what was happening. The lead officer stopped near the aisle, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the stunned crowd. "Ryan Marshall?" Ryan froze, his head snapping toward the officers. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "You're under arrest for fraud and bigamy." The room erupted into chaos. Guests gasped and murmured, the whispers growing louder as everyone tried to make sense of what they were hearing. Olivia staggered back a step, her face pale with disbelief. Ryan's eyes widened in pure panic. "Wait, no, there's been a mistake," he stammered, his voice rising in desperation. "I didn't do anything wrong." He turned toward the officer, holding up his hands as if to plead his case. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." The officers didn't falter. The lead officer pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt, gesturing for Ryan to step forward. "Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Ryan glanced around the room, his gaze darting from the officers to the horrified faces of his guests, then back to Olivia and Sophia. His breathing quickened as he took a step backward. "No, you don't understand. I was just—" He spun on his heel, attempting to bolt toward the side door, but the second officer was faster. In one swift motion, the officer grabbed Ryan by the arm, twisting it behind his back and pinning him in place. "Let me go," Ryan shouted, his voice cracking as he struggled against the officer's grip. "You don't know what you're doing. I didn't do anything wrong." Sophia stood frozen, watching as the man she had once trusted was handcuffed in front of the entire room. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, and an aching sadness. Olivia, meanwhile, stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face as she stared at Ryan. Her shock gave way to fury, and before she even realized it, the words spilled out of her. "You used me," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You used all of us. You lied to me, to her, to everyone here." She stepped forward, her hands shaking as she pulled the engagement ring from her finger. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. The officers were already guiding him toward the exit, his protests falling on deaf ears. "I hope you rot for this," she hissed, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Then, with a sharp flick of her wrist, she threw the ring at him, the small piece of jewelry bouncing against the floor as it landed at his feet. Ryan flinched, his shoulders sagging as he realized there was no escaping this. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Sophia's for one fleeting moment, but there was no sympathy there, no forgiveness. As the officers led him out of the room, the crowd broke into a flurry of murmurs, the guests whispering among themselves in stunned disbelief. Olivia stood frozen for a moment, her chest heaving as she struggled to contain her emotions. Then she turned toward Sophia, her tear-streaked face softening slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other, their shared pain hanging heavy in the air between them. Olivia's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she nodded faintly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement. Sophia returned the nod, her expression unreadable, but her eyes filled with quiet strength. In that brief exchange, they both understood. They had both been lied to, betrayed in the worst way, but they had both survived. The once perfect wedding hall, which had moments ago been filled with laughter and music, now echoed with gasps, whispers, and the occasional angry shout. Guests huddled in small groups. "I can't believe it," one woman murmured, shaking her head. "How did we not see it? He seemed so charming." Another guest leaned in closer, his expression dark. "Charming? More like a con artist. Did you hear what she said? He stole $60,000 from her and used it to pay for this." He gestured angrily at the opulent decorations surrounding them. Near the front of the room, Olivia's parents stood frozen, their faces a mix of shock and humiliation. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched her pearl necklace, her voice sharp and biting as she turned on her husband. "You said he was perfect for her. You said he was a good man." Her husband, red-faced and flustered, snapped back. "How was I supposed to know? He fooled all of us." Sophia stood near the back of the room, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. She watched as the officers led Ryan through the doors, her heart aching with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. A detective who had been quietly observing the scene approached her, his expression calm but serious. "Sophia Marshall?" he asked gently, his tone respectful. She nodded, her voice barely steady. "Yes." The detective glanced toward the doors where Ryan had just disappeared, and then back at her. "You did the right thing," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This isn't the first time he's done something like this. We've been tracking him for a while. He'll be facing charges from multiple victims." Sophia felt a strange sense of vindication at his words, though it was laced with a deep sadness. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. I just wanted the truth to come out," she said softly. The detective nodded, his expression kind. "Well, it did. And because of you, he won't be able to do this to anyone else." As he walked away, Sophia let out a shaky breath, her hands instinctively moving to rest on her belly. She looked around the room, at the guests still murmuring in disbelief, at Olivia, who stood surrounded by her family, her tear-streaked face turned toward the floor. It was a mess, all of it. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, the soft drizzle painting streaks across the windows. She stepped toward the door, her movement slow, her mind heavy with everything that had just happened. Sophia stood there for a moment longer, the rain cool against her skin, mingling with the tears she didn't realize were still falling. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as the weight of it all began to lift, little by little. As Sophia walked toward her car, her steps slow but steady, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It wasn't bright or overwhelming, but it was there. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered softly, "We're going to be okay." For the first time, she believed it. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity, a heavy air of anticipation filling the space. Rows of wooden benches were packed with spectators, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and disbelief. Reporters with notebooks and cameras sat ready, their pens poised to capture every damning word. At the center of it all sat Ryan, his tailored suit crisp and pristine, his back straight, as though he were still in control. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering with a smug tilt to his lips, occasionally glancing around the room like this was just another deal he could finesse his way out of. Sophia sat a few feet away at the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The soft hum of chatter felt like it was miles away as she focused on the papers laid out in front of her. Her heart was pounding, her breath uneven, but she forced herself to stay composed. Her name was called, and she stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her. As she walked to the stand, her knees felt weak, but she straightened her shoulders, willing herself to be strong. The prosecutor's voice was calm and steady as he approached. "Mrs. Marshall, could you please state your name for the record?" "Sophia Marshall," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She cleared her throat, trying again. "Sophia Marshall." He nodded, offering her a small, encouraging smile. "Thank you. Now, Mrs. Marshall, could you describe your relationship with the defendant, Ryan Marshall?" Sophia's eyes flicked to Ryan, who was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed as though he had nothing to worry about. Her stomach churned, but she looked back at the prosecutor. "He's my husband," she said, her voice steady this time. "Or at least, he was." Her words sent a ripple through the room, whispers breaking out among the spectators. The prosecutor stepped closer. "And can you tell us about the events that led to this case?" "Ryan convinced me to give him $60,000, she began. "He said it was for a business deal. He told me it would secure our future, mine, his, and our babies." Her voice cracked slightly at the mention of her child, and she saw a few sympathetic faces in the crowd. She pressed on. "I trusted him. I transferred the money, believing everything he said. But then," she paused, swallowing hard as the memory of finding the wedding invitation flooded back. "I found out he wasn't using it for a business deal. He was using it to pay for a wedding, his wedding, to someone else." The prosecutor nodded and stepped aside, his expression one of quiet approval. "No further questions, Your Honor." Sophia started to stand, but Ryan's lawyer immediately rose, his voice sharp and calculated. "Mrs. Marshall, if I may," he began, a faint smirk playing on his lips. She sat back down, her chest tightening as she braced herself for what was coming. "Mrs. Marshall," the lawyer said, pacing slowly in front of her, "you've just described in great detail how you willingly gave my client $60,000. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sophia said, her voice steady. So just to clarify for the court, this money wasn't stolen. It was a gift. You transferred it into his account voluntarily. Isn't that right? Sophia hesitated for a split second, knowing how he was twisting her words. I gave him the money because he said it was for us, for our family. The lawyer nodded, his tone almost condescending. But you didn't sign a contract, did you? There's no legal document stating how this money was to be used, correct? No, Sophia admitted, her voice quieter now. And my client didn't force you to transfer the money, did he? No, she said again, feeling the heat rising in her cheeks. The lawyer turned to the jury, spreading his hands dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not a case of fraud. It's a case of regret. Mrs. Marshall willingly gave this money to my client, and now, because their relationship didn't work out, she's trying to paint him as a criminal. Sophia's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. That's not true, she said, her voice trembling but firm. The lawyer ignored her. She's bitter, plain and simple, he said, turning back to the jury. She's trying to ruin my client's life because she couldn't let go when he moved on. Objection, the prosecutor said, his voice sharp. Withdrawn. The lawyer replied smoothly, then turned back to Sophia. Mrs. Marshall, do you have any concrete proof that my client didn't intend to use the money for your future? Sophia opened her mouth to speak but faltered. She didn't have text messages or emails spelling out his lies, just the circumstantial evidence she had pieced together. The lawyer smirked, as if her hesitation was exactly what he'd been waiting for. No further questions, Your Honor, he said, his voice laced with satisfaction. Sophia sat there, her heart racing, her face flushed with anger and frustration. She glanced at the prosecutor, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. She had told the truth. That was all she could do. As she stepped down from the stand, she caught Ryan's eye. He didn't look smug or confident. He looked worried, and that was enough to remind her she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The courtroom buzzed faintly as the next witness was called. The prosecutor approached the stand, his tone calm but firm. Please state your name for the court. The man cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. James Hart. And how do you know the defendant, Mr. Hart? James let out a bitter chuckle, his eyes darting to Ryan, who was now sitting stiffly, his jaw clenched. We used to be friends, James said, his voice rough. Business partners too, at least that's what I thought. Ryan and I started a real estate project together a few years ago. He told me it was a surefire deal, said we'd make a fortune. I believed him. I put everything I had into it, my savings, my time, everything. But there was no project, no deal. He took my money and vanished. The murmurs grew louder, and the prosecutor raised a hand to quiet the room. And did you confront Mr. Marshall about this? I tried, James said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Ryan. But by the time I figured it out, he was gone, changed his number, moved somewhere else. I never saw him again, until now. He gestured toward the defense table, his expression bitter. Ryan's lawyer stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is irrelevant and highly prejudicial. The judge raised an eyebrow. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Hart. James nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the stand. I just want to say, this isn't the first time he's done something like this. He's been running this scam for years. Trust me, I learned the hard way. The tension in the room was palpable as James stepped down, his eyes locking with Ryan's one last time before he returned to his seat. Ryan's face had turned a deep shade of red, his composure cracking further with each passing moment. The prosecutor called the next witness, a wedding planner. A woman in her 30s stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely concealing the frustration simmering beneath the surface. Please state your name for the court, the prosecutor said. Laura Bennett, she replied crisply. And what is your connection to the defendant? Laura adjusted her glasses, her lips pressing into a thin line. I was the planner for his wedding. He hired me to handle everything, the flowers, the venue, the catering. And did Mr. Marshall ever mention that he was married? Laura snorted, shaking her head. Absolutely not. He claimed he was single, said he was marrying the love of his life, told me money wasn't an issue, and paid up front for everything. She glanced at Sophia, a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. If I'd known what was really going on, I would have refused to work with him. The prosecutor nodded. And to your knowledge, how did Mr. Marshall present himself to the vendors? Like he was some big-shot entrepreneur, Laura said with a shrug. Single, wealthy, generous. He charmed everyone, made us all believe he was someone important. But now, she trailed off, shaking her head again. Ryan's lawyer stood once more. Objection, Your Honor. Speculative. The judge nodded. Sustained. Stick to the facts, Miss Bennett. Of course, Laura said, her tone clipped. As she stepped down, the weight of her testimony hung heavily in the room. Ryan fidgeted in his seat, his confident smirk completely gone now. When the final arguments were made, the courtroom fell silent, all eyes on the judge as she prepared to deliver her verdict. Sophia sat on the edge of her seat, her heart pounding as she clutched her hands tightly in her lap. The judge's voice was firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Ryan Marshall, your actions were calculated and cruel, preying on the trust of those who believed in you. You exploited their hopes and dreams for your own personal gain. This court will not tolerate such deceit. Ryan's face turned ashen, his hands gripping the edge of the table as the judge continued. You are hereby sentenced to 7 years in prison for fraud and ordered to repay Mrs. Sophia Marshall the full $60,000 you stole from her. Additionally, restitution will be made to your other victims as determined by further investigation. Ryan shot to his feet, his voice desperate. Your Honor, please, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean— Enough, Mr. Marshall, the judge interrupted, her tone sharp. You've had your chance to speak. As the bailiffs approached, Ryan's voice grew louder, more frantic. This isn't fair. I was just trying to build a life. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound echoing in the silent room. His eyes darted around, landing on Sophia. Sophia, please, he begged, his voice breaking. You know me. You know I didn't mean this. Help me, please. Sophia met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. I thought I knew you, she said quietly, but I was wrong. Ryan's shoulders slumped, the last of his bravado crumbling as the bailiffs led him away. The doors closed behind him, and the room let out a collective breath, the tension finally breaking. As Sophie walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight streaming through the doors felt warm against her skin, a stark contrast to the storm she'd just weathered. We're going to be okay now, she whispered softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. I promise. She stepped into the light, ready to start again, ready to rebuild. The warm afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Sophia's small, cozy home, casting a soft golden light over the living room. She sat on the couch, cradling her newborn daughter in her arms, her heart swelling as the baby let out a tiny yawn and snuggled closer to her chest. The room was peaceful, the faint scent of lavender in the air, and a soft melody playing from a speaker on the shelf. It wasn't the life Sophia had imagined a year ago, but it was hers, and it was enough. She glanced around the room, taking in the secondhand furniture she'd carefully picked out, the colorful baby toys scattered across the floor, and the framed ultrasound picture sitting proudly on the mantel. Everything here had been built with her own 2 hands, and for the first time, she felt proud of herself. Sophia thought back to everything she'd been through, how hard it had been to pick up the pieces after Ryan's betrayal, the long nights crying, the mornings where it felt like she didn't have the strength to face the day, the fear that maybe she wasn't enough to build a life on her own. But here she was, proving to herself and the world that she could. It wasn't easy, she said softly, glancing down at her baby's peaceful face. But we're stronger now, and I'll teach you to never settle for less than you deserve. No one's ever going to take advantage of us again, I promise. Her voice was steady, filled with determination and love. She kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart swelling with gratitude for this second chance at life. Meanwhile, somewhere far less inviting, Ryan sat alone in a stark gray prison cell. The walls felt like they were closing in on him as he leaned against the cold metal bed frame, staring at the floor. His once pristine suit was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit, and the confident smirk he'd always worn had long since faded. His mind raced with everything he'd lost. The parties, the money, the people who used to admire him, all of it was gone. He thought about Sophia, about the way she had stood tall in that courtroom and exposed him for what he was. The memory made his chest tighten with anger, but also with something unfamiliar, regret. Ryan wasn't sure how he had let everything spiral so far out of control. He buried his face in his hands, his world now reduced to the stark reality of the choices he'd made.